There's a certain kind of person who apologizes before they've done anything wrong. They say sorry when someone bumps into them. They apologize for asking a question, for taking up space, for existing too loudly or too quietly. They're the ones who send a text and then immediately send another saying, "Sorry, I know you're busy." These are the over-apologizers, the ones who carry guilt like a second skin, the ones who've learned that saying "I'm sorry" keeps the peace, even when the war was never theirs to fight. They move through the world carefully, reading faces like weather patterns, measuring their presence against everyone else's comfort. They pause before speaking, not because they're unsure of their words, but because they're calculating the cost of being heard. They apologize for needing things, for feeling things, for being things. And if you watch closely, you'll see how they make themselves smaller in crowded rooms, how their sentences begin with qualifiers, how they carry tension in their shoulders like they're bracing for impact that never comes but might. It's both a learned behaviour and a prison. But if you've ever been the first to apologise, you know it's not about being weak. It's about something deeper. It's about survival. And to understand people who always apologise first, you have to understand the war between what they feel and what they've learned. Most people think apologising is about taking responsibility. But for chronic apologisers, saying sorry is breathing. It's how they navigate existence. They don't just apologise for mistakes, they apologise for needing something, for asking a question, for taking too long to respond, for responding too quickly. They apologise for the weather being bad when you meet them, as if they personally failed to arrange sunshine. And while others use sorry to repair actual harm, chronic apologisers use it as currency, a way to pay for the space they occupy, a preemptive strike against rejection. Because while most people see apologies as admissions of guilt, chronic apologisers see them as peace offerings to a world that might turn against them at any moment. Psychologically speaking, this behaviour is rooted in what researchers call hyper-responsibility, the tendency to feel accountable not just for your own actions, but for everyone's emotional experience. It's a form of hypervigilance where the brain is constantly scanning for signs of displeasure, tension, or disappointment in others. The amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for detecting threats, stays activated. And in chronic apologisers, that threat isn't a bear in the woods, it's someone's slight frown. A moment of silence, a shift in tone. Their nervous system reads these microsignals as danger, and apologising becomes the way to neutralise it. It's not magic, it's attentiveness. But attentiveness turned inward against itself. They become fluent in reading rooms, in sensing when energy drops, in noticing the smallest indicators that someone might be upset. And instead of asking what's wrong or simply letting it exist, they assume responsibility. They apologise to smooth over tension they didn't create, to fill silence they didn't cause, to fix moods they aren't responsible for managing. The apology becomes armour, a way to deflect criticism before it arrives, a way to control an interaction when everything else feels unpredictable. So they apologise, not because they believe they're wrong, but because wrong feels safer than conflict. But this pattern doesn't come from nowhere. It has roots. This need to apologise first usually starts young, in homes where emotions were unpredictable, where a parent's mood could shift like weather, and a child learned to read the sky. Maybe it was a father whose anger arrived without warning, sudden and consuming, and the child discovered that saying sorry could sometimes soften the storm. Or a mother whose disappointment hung in the air like humidity, thick and inescapable, and apologising became a way to clear it. Or parents who were simply absent, distracted, too burdened by their own pain to notice their child except, when that child became inconvenient. And in those homes, children learn quickly. They learn to monitor, to anticipate, to manage the emotional temperature of everyone around them because their safety depends on it. A child in that environment doesn't have the luxury of simply being a child. They become emotional meteorologists watching for the pressure drops that signal a coming storm. They notice when a parent's jaw tightens, when footsteps grow heavier, when silence becomes the kind that precedes an eruption. And they learn that apologizing, even preemptively, can sometimes change the forecast. It gives them a sense of control in a world that feels chaotic. If I say sorry first, maybe I can stop what's coming. If I take the blame, maybe everyone else can be okay. It's not about guilt, it's about survival. The pattern forms in the nervous system itself. The brain learns that apologizing equals safety, that taking responsibility for things beyond your control somehow protects you from worse outcomes. It becomes automatic, a reflex as unconscious as flinching. And children who grow up this way often don't remember a time when they didn't apologize for existing. They carry it into classrooms where they apologize to teachers for asking questions, into friendships where they apologize for having needs, into every relationship that follows. Not because they were bad children, but because they were perceptive ones, sensitive enough to sense danger that others might miss, intuitive enough to know that in their particular home, peace was more valuable than truth. That's why the apology becomes foundational. It's not a choice, it's architecture. The apology wasn't about being sorry, it was about being safe. And once you learn that equation, it's hard to unlearn. This childhood pattern doesn't stay in childhood. It follows them into adulthood, where the stakes feel different but the instinct remains the same. As adults, chronic apologizers become peacekeepers, not because they love harmony, but because they fear discord more than anything. The child who learned to manage their parents' emotions becomes the adult who manages everyone's. At work, they apologize for sending emails, for scheduling meetings, for asking clarifying questions as if curiosity is an imposition. They say sorry before presenting ideas, sorry for taking up time in conversations, sorry for existing in the same conference room as people more important than them. And when a project goes wrong, even one they had no part in, they'll find a way to shoulder some of the blame. Because taking responsibility feels more familiar than watching someone else be uncomfortable. They apologize at work, they apologize in friendships, they apologize in love. In relationships, this pattern intensifies. They apologize when their partner's in a bad mood, assuming somehow they caused it. They apologize for having needs, for wanting attention, for asking to be considered. If their partner forgets an anniversary, they'll apologize for making it a big deal. If a friend cancels plans repeatedly, they'll apologize for even mentioning it. They smooth over tension that isn't theirs to smooth. They absorb anger that isn't theirs to absorb. They carry the emotional labor of keeping everyone regulated, everyone calm, everyone okay. And the hypervigilance that started in childhood never stops. They still read micro-expressions. They still sense shifts in energy before anyone else does. They walk into a room and immediately scan for who might be upset, who might need managing, who might require an apology to stay settled. It's exhausting, but they don't know another way to exist. Because while others move through life-setting boundaries, chronic apologizers soften theirs until they're barely visible. While others assert needs, they minimize them. While others assume good intent, they assume they're always one mistake away from being too much. The peacekeeping isn't about peace. It's about preventing the rejection they've learned to expect. They become responsible for everyone's comfort but their own. And that responsibility comes with a cost. But here's where it gets painful. When you apologize for existing, you start to believe you're the problem. The cost of chronic apologizing isn't just exhaustion, it's self-erasure. Over time, their sense of self begins to fade. They stop knowing what they actually want because wanting feels dangerous. They stop expressing opinions because having a perspective might contradict someone else's. They learn to read every room except the one inside themselves. And slowly, quietly, they disappear. Their self-worth becomes contingent on how little trouble they cause, how accommodating they can be, how small they can make their needs. They measure their value by their ability to not need anything, to not ask for anything, to not be anything that might inconvenience someone else. And when you spend years apologizing for your existence, eventually you start to believe the apology is deserved. This breeds a specific kind of resentment. Not the loud, explosive kind, but the silent kind that accumulates like sediment at the bottom of a lake. They resent always being the one to yield, always being the one to apologize first, to compromise first, to shrink first. But they can't express that resentment because expressing it would require taking up space, and taking up space is exactly what they've learned not to do. So the resentment turns inward. It becomes self-criticism. They start believing they're weak for feeling angry, selfish for having needs, broken for wanting more than they're getting. What do I actually want? Do my feelings even matter? Am I allowed to take up space, or is my only value in making room for everyone else? The questions loop endlessly, but answers never come. Because to answer them honestly would require believing they deserve something, and that belief was apologized away years ago. They become strangers to their own desires. Imposter syndrome sets in, not just about their work, but about their entire existence. They feel like they're performing being a person, rather than actually being one. Like if anyone looked too closely, they'd see there's nothing substantial underneath all the accommodation. It's loneliness wearing the mask of connection. The apology meant to protect them becomes the thing that erases them. It also affects how others see them. People respond to chronic apologizers in predictable ways. Some exploit it, some dismiss it, few understand it. There are those who learn, consciously or not, that the chronic apologizer will always yield. They push a little harder in negotiations. They take a little more than they give. They cancel plans knowing forgiveness will come easily. They vent without reciprocating. They take and take because the apologizer has made it clear through years of sorry that their boundaries are negotiable. These people aren't necessarily malicious. They're simply responding to the dynamic the apologizer has created. Where one person constantly makes room, another person will expand to fill it. Then there are those who get frustrated. Stop apologizing, they say, as if it's that simple, as if a survival pattern built over decades can be switched off with awareness. These people mean well, but their frustration adds another layer of shame. Now the chronic apologizer is apologizing for apologizing, which confirms their belief that they really are too much, too broken, too difficult to be around. And then there are those who don't notice at all. They accept the accommodation as baseline. They assume the chronic apologizer is just easygoing, just flexible, just naturally selfless. They have no idea how much effort goes into that ease, how much self-suppression, how much internal negotiation happens before every sorry is spoken. These people benefit the most while seeing the cost the least. The chronic apologizer watches all of this. They notice who takes advantage. They notice who gets annoyed. They notice who doesn't notice. And each observation reinforces the pattern. See? I am too much. My needs are burdensome. My existence requires management. So they apologize for apologizing. The cycle tightens. But understanding why this happens requires looking at what's really going on inside, at the psychological machinery that keeps this pattern running. There's a term in psychology called anticipatory anxiety, the fear of something that hasn't happened yet. For chronic apologizers, this anxiety is constant. Their brain lives 3 steps ahead, scanning every interaction for potential conflict, predicting disappointment, imagining rejection before it arrives. And apologizing becomes the way they try to prevent what they're afraid of. It's a safety behavior, a preemptive defense against a threat that exists mostly in their nervous system. Here's how the loop works. First comes the anxiety. A conversation is about to happen. A request needs to be made. An opinion might be expressed. Before any of this occurs, their body tenses, heart rate increases, the amygdala signals danger. They imagine all the ways this could go wrong, all the ways they might upset someone, all the ways they might be too much. So they apologize. Sorry to bother you, sorry if this is a bad time, sorry for even asking. And for a moment the anxiety drops. The nervous system relaxes slightly. They've done the thing that feels like protection. They've softened themselves, made themselves smaller, reduced the perceived threat. But relief is temporary, because what they've actually done is reinforce the belief that they needed to apologize in the first place. That without the apology, something bad would have happened. That they really are a burden, really are too much, really do require constant self-correction to be acceptable. The brain learns apologizing equals safety. And the next time a similar situation arises, the anxiety comes back stronger. The threshold for feeling like they need to apologize gets lower. What started as apologizing for actual mistakes becomes apologizing for asking questions, then for existing in shared spaces, then for having feelings at all. This is what psychologists call a reinforcement cycle. The behavior that's meant to reduce anxiety actually strengthens it over time. It's like scratching an itch. It feels better in the moment, but it makes the itch worse in the long run. Chronic apologizers are stuck in a loop where the solution has become the problem. They apologize to escape discomfort, but the apology itself generates more anxiety because it confirms their worst fear about themselves. Not because conflict actually exists, but because their brain predicts it everywhere. The apology that was supposed to prevent pain becomes the source of it. And beneath all of this is something even deeper, a belief system so fundamental they might not even know it's there. Beneath every automatic apology is a belief, a quiet voice that says, I am too much, I am the problem, I need to make myself smaller. This isn't a conscious thought, it's deeper than that. It's a core belief, the kind that forms early and then operates invisibly, shaping every interaction, filtering every experience through a lens of inherent wrongness. Chronic apologizers don't wake up and decide to believe they're burdensome. The belief is so foundational it feels like fact, like gravity, like something that simply is. This belief starts in childhood, in moments when a child's needs were met with irritation or their emotions with dismissal. When asking for attention resulted in rejection. When being themselves was somehow too much. The child internalizes a simple but devastating equation. I am the reason things go wrong. My presence causes problems. If people are unhappy, it must be because of me. And once that belief takes root, it colours everything. They don't just think they made a mistake, they think they are the mistake. A friend cancels plans, and instead of assuming the friend is busy, they assume they said something wrong last time they met. A colleague seems distracted in a meeting, And instead of recognizing the colleague might have personal stress, they assume they gave a bad presentation. A partner is quiet, and instead of asking what's on their mind, they mentally catalogue everything they might have done to cause that silence. This is what cognitive behavioral therapists call personalization, the tendency to interpret neutral events as being about you, specifically about your failings. The belief becomes a filter that only lets through information that confirms it. Compliments get dismissed as politeness. Success gets attributed to luck. But criticism, that lands with the weight of absolute truth, because it aligns with what they already believe about themselves. It becomes identity. And once that belief takes root, every apology waters it. But this pattern isn't just about the person apologizing. It fundamentally reshapes every relationship they enter. Relationships need balance. But when one person is always apologizing, balance becomes impossible. Power doesn't require intention to become unequal. It happens naturally when one person consistently yields and another consistently receives that yielding. The chronic apologizer, by constantly saying sorry, by constantly accommodating, by constantly making themselves smaller, hands over power without even realizing they're doing it. And the other person, whether they mean to or not, accepts that power. They become the one whose preferences matter more, whose moods dictate the emotional climate, whose comfort takes precedence. This creates a dynamic where the apologizer is always adjusting, always calibrating, always managing. While one person shrinks, the other expands. Not because the expanding person is necessarily selfish, but because the space is being offered to them. When someone apologizes constantly, when they defer constantly, when they accommodate constantly, the message is clear. Your needs are more important than mine, and most people, consciously or not, will accept that hierarchy as truth. Resentment builds on both sides, though neither might name it. The apologizer resents always being the flexible one, always being the one to compromise, always being the one to carry the emotional labor of maintaining harmony, but they can't express that resentment without violating the very role they've created for themselves. Meanwhile, the other person might grow frustrated too, feeling like they're in a relationship with someone who has no opinions, no edges, no authentic presence. They might crave pushback, honesty, even conflict. But they've been trained by years of apologies to expect smoothness. Authentic connection requires two people showing up fully. But when one person is always apologizing, only half a relationship exists. Chronic apologizers often attract specific types of people: rescuers who want to fix them, exploiters who benefit from their accommodation, or people who simply accept the imbalance as normal because it suits them. Rarely do they attract people who challenge the pattern, who insist on equality, who refuse to let them disappear. Because those people feel dangerous, they require the chronic apologizer to show up, to take up space, to exist without apology. And that feels impossible. The relationship they're trying to protect becomes the thing they can't fully enter. And protecting relationships at all costs comes from a specific fear, one that lives deeper than any single relationship. At the core of chronic apologizing is a fear, not just of conflict, but of abandonment. The terror that if they're difficult, if they have needs, if they're anything other than easy and accommodating, they'll be left. This fear runs so deep it rarely surfaces as conscious thought. It's more like an undertow pulling them toward apology before they even register why. Every sorry carries an invisible second message: please don't leave me. It's not about being wrong, it's about staying wanted. This fear usually traces back to attachment experiences in early life. Children who had inconsistent caregivers, parents who are emotionally available one day and withdrawn the next, learn that love is conditional and fragile. They learn that being too needy results in rejection, that expressing anger means losing connection, that the safest way to stay close to someone is to require as little as possible from them. Some experienced actual abandonment, a parent who left, a caregiver who disappeared, and the lesson became permanent. People leave when you're too much, so they make themselves less. They apologize for having needs because needs once led to loss. They apologize for emotions because emotions once pushed people away. They apologize for taking up space because space once felt like the reason they were abandoned. The apology becomes a tether, a way to keep people close by constantly signaling, "I won't be a burden, I won't be difficult, I promise I'm worth keeping." People with anxious attachment styles do this most intensely. Their nervous system is wired to perceive relationships as inherently unstable, always on the verge of ending. They scan for signs of pulling away, for distance, for cooling affection. And when they sense it, real or imagined, they apologize. They accommodate. They shrink. Anything to close the gap they fear is widening. They fear being too much. They fear being not enough. They fear the inevitability of being left. The apology whispers, "Please let me stay." But staying at any cost means losing yourself, and that loss has a name. There's a cruel irony in chronic apologizing. In trying not to be abandoned by others, they abandon themselves. Every time they say sorry for something that doesn't warrant apology, they're choosing someone else's comfort over their own truth. Every time they suppress a need to avoid conflict, they're betraying the part of themselves that deserves to be considered. Over years, decades, a lifetime of this, they lose touch with who they actually are underneath all the accommodation. They don't just ignore their feelings, they apologize for having them. Anger gets swallowed because anger might push people away. Hurt gets minimized because expressing hurt might make someone feel guilty. Disappointment gets reframed as their own unrealistic expectations because voicing disappointment might sound like criticism. They become experts at emotional suppression, at talking themselves out of what they feel, at convincing themselves that their reactions are wrong, excessive, unwarranted. They gaslight themselves more effectively than anyone else could. This is emotional self-neglect. And it has consequences the body can't ignore, because when emotions don't get expressed, they don't disappear. They go underground. The body keeps the score. Chronic apologizers often struggle with tension headaches, digestive issues, fatigue that rest doesn't fix. Their nervous system stays activated, holding all the emotions they've taught themselves not to feel. The jaw clenches, the shoulders tighten, the stomach churns. These aren't separate from the apologizing, they're part of it. The body is carrying what the voice won't say. They stop advocating for themselves in small ways that accumulate into something devastating. They don't correct orders that come out wrong. They don't mention when they're uncomfortable. They don't ask for what they need because asking feels like an imposition. They build lives around other people's preferences and call it compromise when really it's disappearance. It's self-erasure. They become strangers to themselves, and that disconnection from self shows up in a specific way that leaves them feeling untethered from their own identity. One of the most disorienting things about being a chronic apologizer is this: they don't know who they are when they're not sorry. Their entire identity has been built around accommodation, around being the easy one, the flexible one, the one who doesn't cause problems, And when that role is all you've known, removing it feels like removing the foundation of a house. What's left standing? They can't answer simple questions. Where do you want to eat? I don't know, anywhere is fine. What movie should we watch? Whatever you want. What do you think about this decision? I'm okay with whatever everyone else prefers. These aren't just polite deferrals. They genuinely don't know. Their preferences have been so thoroughly suppressed, so consistently set aside, that accessing them feels like reaching for something that was never there. What do I actually like? What do I want? Who am I when I'm not accommodating everyone else? The questions reveal an emptiness that terrifies them, because their sense of self has been entirely relational, entirely dependent on their function in other people's lives. They know who they are in relation to others, the supporter, the peacekeeper, the apologizer, but they don't know who they are alone. Identity feels like something they've borrowed from the expectations around them, rather than something that originates from within. When they try to stop apologizing, when they attempt to set boundaries or express preferences, they experience a disorienting sense of not recognizing themselves. It feels wrong. It feels selfish. It feels like they're becoming someone they're not, when actually they're becoming someone they've never had the chance to be. The discomfort isn't evidence they're doing something wrong. It's evidence they're doing something unfamiliar. It's terrifying, because apologizing gave them a role. Without it, they're unsure how to exist. But here's what many people don't realize about chronic apologizers. Beneath all that accommodation lies a kind of strength most people overlook. But here's something people don't realize about chronic apologizers. They're not weak. They're acutely, sometimes painfully, aware. The same hypervigilance that drives them to apologize constantly also gives them an extraordinary ability to read people, to sense what's unspoken, to navigate emotional landscapes that others can't even see. That sensitivity, when not turned entirely against themselves, is a form of genius. They notice everything. The micro-expression that flashes across someone's face before they compose it. The slight shift in vocal tone that signals hurt underneath anger. The way someone's body language changes when a topic makes them uncomfortable. Most people miss these signals entirely, but chronic apologizers catch them all. Because their survival once depended on reading emotional weather patterns, they developed a kind of emotional intelligence that borders on clairvoyant. This makes them exceptional friends when they're not drowning in their own self-doubt. They remember the small things people mention in passing. They check in when someone seems off. They can hold space for complex emotions without trying to fix them or rush them. They understand that people rarely say what they actually mean, that pain often disguises itself as anger, that vulnerability requires safety to emerge, and they can create that safety because they know intimately what it feels like to not have it. That's why people often feel deeply seen by chronic apologizers, not in a way that's intrusive, but in a way that's honoring. They pay attention. They listen not just to words, but to what lives underneath them. They can sense when someone needs to talk and when someone needs silence, when to step closer and when to give space. Their empathy, when not weaponized against them, when not demanding they sacrifice themselves to prove it, is profound. It's the kind that doesn't just feel with people but feels for them, that understands suffering not as an abstract concept, but as a lived experience they recognize in others because they carry so much of it themselves. Their sensitivity, when not turned against them, is a superpower. But using that sensitivity healthily requires something difficult. something that feels almost impossible for someone whose entire nervous system has been wired around a different imperative. For a chronic apologizer, not apologizing feels like standing on the edge of a cliff. Every instinct screams, "Say sorry, make it safe." Learning to stop the pattern isn't a matter of simple awareness or willpower. It requires rewiring a nervous system that has spent years, maybe decades, believing that apologizing equals survival. And when you try to interrupt that belief, when you catch yourself about to say sorry and force yourself to stay silent instead, your body revolts. The anxiety floods in immediately, heart racing, chest tightening, a voice in your head insisting that you're being rude, selfish, cruel. That silence where an apology used to be feels like a canyon opening between you and the other person. The urge to fill it, to smooth it over, to make yourself small again becomes almost unbearable, because their nervous system still believes apologizing is what keeps them safe. Without it, they feel exposed, vulnerable, like they've just done something unforgivable by simply existing without contrition. And sometimes, others react badly. People who've grown accustomed to the chronic apologizer's accommodation might feel unsettled when boundaries suddenly appear. Friends might say, "Wow, you're different," and not mean it as a compliment. Partners might resist the shift in dynamic. Colleagues might find them suddenly difficult when they stop over-apologizing for taking up space. This external resistance confirms what the apologizer fears, that being myself, asserting myself, means losing people. But the discomfort is also internal. They feel like they're being mean when they're simply being direct. They feel selfish when they're just advocating for themselves. They feel demanding when they're expressing basic needs, not because they're actually being cruel, but because their calibration is so far off that normal self-assertion registers as aggression. That's why stopping requires tremendous courage. It means tolerating the anxiety that comes with change. It means practicing in small ways, noticing before the apology leaves your mouth, replacing sorry with thank you when appropriate, asking yourself, am I actually responsible for this, or am I just existing? Unlearning survival patterns feels like unlearning how to breathe. But there are specific tools that help, pathways toward reclaiming a self that doesn't constantly apologize for being. Healing from chronic apologizing isn't about becoming unapologetic, it's about becoming selective. The goal isn't to swing to the opposite extreme, to never say sorry, to become someone who refuses accountability. That's just another form of rigidity. Healing is about discernment, learning to distinguish between genuine responsibility and reflexive self-blame, between appropriate apology and unnecessary accommodation. It's about reclaiming the right to exist without constantly seeking permission. Therapy helps tremendously with this work. Cognitive behavioral therapy can identify the automatic thoughts that trigger apologizing, the core beliefs that drive them, the patterns that maintain them. A therapist can help map the origins, showing how a parent's unpredictability or a childhood rejection created a neural pathway that still fires decades later. Internal family systems therapy can help them recognize the part of them that apologizes as a protector, one that developed to keep them safe but now restricts them. EMDR can process the traumatic roots if the pattern stems from genuine harm. The modality matters less than finding someone who understands that chronic apologizing isn't a character flaw, it's an adaptation. But therapy alone isn't enough. The healing happens in daily practice, starting small, setting one boundary and tolerating the discomfort that follows, saying no without explaining, justifying, or softening it into something more palatable, expressing a preference without qualifying it with maybe or if that's okay. Each small act of not apologizing is exposure therapy for a nervous system convinced that assertion equals danger. Self-compassion becomes critical here. Not the toxic positivity kind, but the Kristin Neff kind. The research-backed practice of treating yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a friend. When you notice yourself apologizing excessively, instead of criticizing yourself for it, you acknowledge the fear underneath it, the part of you trying to stay safe, and you gently remind that part, we're not in danger anymore. They learn to pause, they learn to notice, they learn to ask themselves what they're actually apologizing for before the word leaves their mouth. It's slow work, but it's sacred work. Part of that work involves understanding something crucial, a distinction that changes everything about how they relate to apology itself. Here's the thing, apologizing isn't the problem. Apologizing for existing is. There's a profound difference between genuine accountability and reflexive self-blame, and learning to tell them apart is essential to healing. A healthy apology acknowledges actual harm. It says, I did something that hurt you, I see that impact, I take responsibility, and I want to make it right. It's specific, it's proportional, it repairs rupture. An excessive apology preempts harm that hasn't happened. It says, I'm sorry for needing something, for having an opinion, for occupying space you'd rather I didn't occupy. Healthy apology looks like this. You snap at someone because you're stressed. You recognize it later. You say, I'm sorry I was short with you earlier. I was overwhelmed, but that's not an excuse. Excessive apology looks like this. You apologize for asking a legitimate question at work, for sending an email, for existing in the elevator when someone else gets in. The difference is responsibility. Are you actually accountable for what you're apologizing for? Did you cause harm, or are you just a person with needs? Did you violate someone's boundaries, or did you simply assert your own? Were you genuinely inconsiderate, or were you just imperfect, human, taking up the space you're entitled to? Learning this distinction requires asking new questions. What am I actually apologizing for? Did I do something wrong, or am I apologizing for being inconvenient? Is this apology repairing harm, or is it preempting imagined rejection? Would a reasonable person expect an apology here, or is this my anxiety speaking? It's not selfishness, it's discernment. The goal isn't to never apologize, it's to apologize with intention, to save sorry for moments when it actually matters, when genuine repair is needed, when accountability serves connection rather than self-erasure. An intention requires something they've rarely given themselves, something that feels almost radical in its simplicity. What chronic apologizers need most isn't to stop saying sorry, it's to start believing they're allowed to exist without permission. This sounds simple, but for someone who's spent their life seeking approval to occupy space, it's revolutionary. The idea that you don't need to earn your right to have needs, to express feelings, to take up room in the world, that you're entitled to these things simply by being human, feels almost too big to hold. They've been operating under a different set of rules, rules that say you must justify your presence, you must minimize your impact, you must prove you're worth the oxygen you breathe, the time you take, the attention you ask for. And those rules have kept them small, kept them safe, kept them from fully inhabiting their own life. Permission to exist means permission to have needs, not excessive needs, not demands that disregard others, but basic human needs for rest, for consideration, for affection, for space. It means recognizing that needing things doesn't make you burdensome, it makes you human. Permission to take up space, to speak in meetings without apologizing first, to share your work without diminishing it, to enter a room without making yourself invisible, to be seen, heard, considered. Not aggressively, not demanding all the attention, but simply allowing yourself to exist at full size instead of compressed. Permission to be imperfect, to make mistakes without catastrophizing them, to fail without it confirming your worst belief about yourself, to be learning, growing, struggling, without those things meaning you're fundamentally flawed. Imperfection isn't wrongness, it's the condition of being alive. This requires rewriting a core belief that has governed everything. From I must earn my place to I am already worthy. From I am too much to I am enough. From I need permission to I give myself permission. They are allowed. Because existence isn't something you earn. It's something you inherit by being born. But giving yourself that permission means facing something uncomfortable. Something most chronic apologizers have kept buried for years. Beneath all those apologies, there's often something people don't expect. Anger, not the explosive kind that announces itself, but quiet fury at being made small. Years of accommodating everyone else. Years of swallowing their own needs. Years of apologizing for existing while others took and took without ever thinking to say sorry back. That accumulation doesn't disappear. It goes underground, where it lives like lava beneath a dormant volcano, still, hot, waiting. Chronic apologizers often don't recognize their own anger because they've been taught that anger makes them difficult, unlovable, too much. So they've learned to transmute it into something more acceptable. Self-criticism, anxiety, depression, physical symptoms, anything but the raw truth of their rage. But healing requires acknowledging what's been suppressed. And what's been suppressed is often profound anger. Anger at the people who exploited their accommodation, at friends who cancelled repeatedly without consequence, at partners who never thought to ask what they needed, at colleagues who took credit while they apologized for contributing, at parents who made love conditional on compliance, at a world that punished sensitivity and rewarded hardness, and anger at themselves for allowing it, for not speaking up sooner, for years of choosing peace over truth, for becoming so small they forgot they had the right to take up space. This self-directed anger is often the most painful because it confirms their worst belief. I should have known better. I should have been stronger. It's my fault. But anger isn't bad. It's information. It tells you where your boundaries were violated, where you were treated as less than you deserved, where accommodation crossed into self-betrayal. Anger, when acknowledged rather than suppressed, when felt rather than apologized for, becomes clarifying. It shows you what matters, what you won't accept anymore, what needs to change. Not because rage should consume them, but because feeling anger without shame, without immediately apologizing for it, without turning it inward, is part of reclaiming themselves. And learning to feel that anger without apologizing for it, that's liberation. Liberation also requires recognizing a pattern many miss, one that keeps the cycle spinning even when they think they're healing. Chronic apologizers often find themselves in a specific kind of relationship, one where their worth depends on being needed. This is the territory of codependency, where two people become so entangled that individuality dissolves. One person derives their sense of value from fixing, helping, accommodating. The other learns to depend on that accommodation, sometimes exploiting it, sometimes genuinely needing it, but either way perpetuating a dynamic where neither person is fully whole. Codependency feels like love to someone who learned early that their value lies in usefulness. If I'm helpful enough, indispensable enough, accommodating enough, they won't leave. So they become the one who manages everyone else's emotions, who anticipates needs before they're spoken, who sacrifices their own well-being to maintain someone else's comfort, and they attract people who benefit from this arrangement. Sometimes narcissists who need constant validation and see the chronic apologizer's accommodation as their due. Sometimes people with their own unhealed wounds who need someone to carry what they can't. Sometimes just people who've learned that this particular person will always yield. The chronic apologizer enables dysfunction while calling it love. They stay with partners who don't reciprocate. They maintain friendships that only flow one direction. They work for bosses who exploit their willingness to overfunction. And they tell themselves this is loyalty, dedication, love, when really it's enmeshment. A blurring of boundaries so complete they can't tell where they end and the other person begins. Where do I end and you begin? It's a question they can't answer. Breaking the pattern feels like betrayal, because in codependent systems, boundaries are treated as rejection. Saying no feels like abandonment. Taking care of yourself feels selfish. The other person, consciously or not, reinforces this. They might guilt trip. They might withdraw affection. They might frame the apologizer's growth as the apologizer becoming difficult, cold, not who they used to be. Not because dysfunction is comfortable, but because it's familiar. They apologize for having boundaries because boundaries feel like betrayal. But boundaries aren't betrayal. They're the foundation of something healthier, something real. Here's what no one tells chronic apologizers. Boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges to real intimacy. This sounds counterintuitive to someone who's spent their life believing that accommodation equals connection, that yielding creates closeness, that saying yes to everything is how you keep people near. But the opposite is true. Without boundaries, without the ability to say no, to express limits, to protect your own needs, you can't actually connect. You can only perform connection. Because what shows up in boundaryless relationships isn't your authentic self. It's the accommodating version, the people-pleasing version, the self that has been sanded down to fit whatever shape the other person needs. And while that version might be easier to be around, it's not real. It's a carefully constructed presentation designed to prevent rejection. And you can't build genuine intimacy on a presentation. You can only build it on truth. Healthy relationships require two whole people, not one person and one shadow, not one person whose needs matter and one person whose needs disappear. Two people who can both say yes and no, who can both give and receive, who can both hold space and ask for space. This is what mutuality looks like, and mutuality is impossible when one person has no boundaries. Saying no is what makes yes meaningful. When someone knows you'll agree to anything, when they know you'll accommodate endlessly, your yes loses its weight. It becomes expected rather than chosen. But when you have boundaries, when you're capable of declining, when you sometimes say not this time or that doesn't work for me, your yes becomes significant. It means, I chose this, I want this. Not because I'm afraid to refuse, but because I genuinely want to say yes. Boundaries are self-respect, not selfishness. They're the way you signal to others and to yourself that you matter, that your time has value, that your energy isn't infinite, that your comfort deserves consideration too. And paradoxically, boundaries create the safety that allows real closeness to develop. Real connection requires two whole people, and wholeness requires boundaries. Learning this changes everything about how chronic apologizers see themselves and what's possible. When chronic apologizers heal, they don't become cold, they become clear. The transformation isn't a pendulum swing to the opposite extreme, where they refuse to apologize ever, where they become rigid and unyielding. That's just trading one imbalance for another. True healing is more subtle. It's learning to stand in the middle, grounded in their own worth while still caring about others. It's developing the discernment to know when sorry serves connection and when it serves fear. They don't become X, they become Y. They don't become aggressive, they become assertive. They don't become selfish, they become self-aware. They don't lose their sensitivity, they learn to protect it. The empathy that once left them vulnerable to exploitation becomes something they can offer without depleting themselves, because they've learned that caring for others doesn't require abandoning themselves, still empathetic but boundaried, still kind but not at their own expense, still considerate but no longer hyper-responsible for everyone's emotional state. They start choosing their relationships more consciously. They notice who reciprocates and who only takes, who respects their boundaries and who treats them as negotiable, who sees their growth and celebrates it versus who resents it. And they let go of people who require their smallness to feel comfortable, not with anger necessarily, but with clarity. This doesn't serve me anymore. I deserve mutuality. Their voice changes. They speak with less hesitation. They express needs without 10 layers of apology cushioning the request. They disagree without softening their perspective into nothingness. They exist in conversations not as shadows accommodating everyone else's light, but as people with their own substance, their own opinions, their own presence that deserve space. They discover what it feels like to be genuinely flexible rather than compulsively accommodating. Real flexibility comes from groundedness. You can bend when you have roots. But when you have no roots, you're not flexible. You're just blown by every wind. They apologize when it matters, and they stand firm when it doesn't. And standing firm teaches them something essential about who they are beneath all the accommodation. The final stage of healing isn't about others accepting them. It's about them accepting themselves. After years of looking outward for validation, for permission, for confirmation that they're allowed to exist, they have to learn the hardest skill, trusting themselves, trusting that their feelings are valid even when no one else confirms them, trusting that their judgment is sound even when it conflicts with others, trusting that their needs are legitimate even when meeting them inconveniences someone. This is difficult because their entire system has been calibrated to external approval. They've measured their worth by how others respond to them, by whether people seem pleased, whether conflict gets avoided, whether they successfully kept everyone comfortable. That external validation became their compass, and now they have to learn to navigate by an internal one, to develop what psychologists call an internal locus of control, the belief that their value comes from within rather than from others' reactions. They learn to trust their gut feelings. When something feels wrong, they don't immediately dismiss it as anxiety or overthinking. They pause, they consider, what is this feeling telling me? When they feel uncomfortable in a relationship, instead of apologizing for being difficult, they ask, is this discomfort information? Am I being mistreated or am I just being sensitive? And they learn that being sensitive isn't wrong, it's data. They learn to trust their decisions, to choose the restaurant without polling everyone first, to commit to plans without 6 backup options in case someone changes their mind, to make choices and stand by them, knowing that disagreement doesn't equal wrongness. They learn to trust their perception. When someone's words don't match their actions, they trust what they observe rather than gaslighting themselves into believing the words. When they sense tension, they trust it's there rather than assuming they're imagining things. Internal validation begins to replace external. They stop needing everyone's approval to feel okay. They realize the approval they've been seeking was always theirs to give, and that realization changes how they see everything, how they move through the world as someone who belongs, rather than someone who must constantly earn belonging. There's something profoundly human about the way chronic apologizers exist. They remind us that some people have been taught to make themselves small to be loved, that accommodation can become a language spoken so fluently it replaces the voice underneath. That sorry, repeated enough times, can erase the person saying it. But here's what you need to know. So if you're someone who always apologizes first, who carries guilt like a second skin, who has spent years making yourself smaller to keep the peace, you're not too much. You never were. The sensitivity that made you hyper-aware, that taught you to read every room and manage every mood, isn't a flaw. It's a capacity. And the world tried to convince you that capacity was a burden because it didn't know what to do with someone who felt so deeply. You don't owe the world apologies for existing. You don't owe anyone constant accommodation to deserve love. Your needs are not impositions. Your feelings are not inconveniences. Your presence, full-sized and unapologetic, is not something you have to earn permission for. Healing is possible. You were never the problem. The systems that taught you to apologize for being human were the problem. And unlearning that doesn't make you selfish. It makes you whole. Because existing without apology isn't arrogance, it's wholeness. And while the world might have taught you to shrink, you were always meant to expand. Your presence, unapologetic and full, is not a burden, it's a gift. And the people who truly love you have been waiting for you to see it. But chronic apologizers aren't all the same. There are variations in the pattern, different flavors of the same survival mechanism. Understanding which version you are matters less than recognizing they all stem from the same root, but the distinctions can help you trace your particular path back to its beginning. There's the anxious apologizer, the one driven by anticipatory fear who apologizes before interactions even begin. Sorry for emailing, sorry for calling, sorry for existing in your general vicinity. Their nervous system lives 3 steps ahead, predicting rejection before it arrives, and the apology is their attempt to soften a blow that hasn't been thrown yet. They learned early that waiting for bad things to happen feels worse than trying to prevent them, even if prevention is impossible. Then there's the guilt-driven apologizer, usually shaped by religious or moral upbringings that taught them they're inherently flawed, fundamentally wrong, born requiring redemption. They apologize not just for actions but for their nature, for wanting things, for being human. They carry shame like original sin, a burden they didn't choose but can't seem to put down. Every apology is an attempt at absolution that never quite arrives. The trauma response apologizer learned in situations where apologizing literally prevented worse outcomes. Maybe a violent parent whose rage could be sometimes diffused by a child's sorry. Maybe an abusive relationship where apologizing brought temporary safety. For them, apologizing isn't about guilt or anxiety, it's about survival. Their body learned that sorry equals not getting hurt, and the pattern embedded itself so deeply it fires automatically even when danger has long passed. And there's the empathic apologizer. who feels others' emotions so intensely they apologize for any discomfort they sense, even discomfort they didn't cause. They pick up pain like radio signals and immediately try to fix it, apologize for it, absorb it. Their empathy has no boundaries, so they take responsibility for feelings that were never theirs to manage. Most people are some combination, anxious and empathic, trauma-based and guilt-driven. The categories matter less than understanding that each version is an adaptation, a way of navigating a world that felt unsafe, unpredictable, or conditional. Not better or worse, just different paths to the same destination. The belief that your existence requires constant negotiation. Understanding which version you are matters less than understanding that all of them stem from the same root. The belief that your existence requires constant negotiation. But regardless of type, the pattern shows up in the body before it shows up in words. You can recognize a chronic apologizer before they speak. The apology lives in their body first, in the way they hold themselves, the space they occupy, the silent signals they send that say, "I'm trying not to be too much," before they've said anything at all. Watch their shoulders, rounded forward, protective, as if they're perpetually bracing for impact. Their posture curves inward, making their frame smaller, taking up less vertical space in the world. It's not poor posture, it's learned geometry. The physical manifestation of years spent trying not to be noticed, not to impose, not to take up more room than absolutely necessary. Their head tilts down slightly when they speak, eyes flicking up to check your reaction rather than holding steady contact. Direct eye contact feels too assertive, too much like claiming equality. So they glance and retreat, monitoring your face for signs of displeasure while simultaneously apologizing with their gaze for looking at all. The hands give them away too. Nervous gestures, constant motion, touching their face, their neck, wringing their hands together, self-soothing behaviors that betray the anxiety humming beneath the surface. Their arms stay close to their body, elbows pulled in even when sitting. They cross their legs, fold themselves into compact shapes, origami people who've learned to take up minimal space. And their voice, even when they're trying to sound confident, there's something in the tone, a softness, a tentativeness. Statements that lift at the end like questions, as if they're seeking permission for their own observations. Sentences that trail off, leaving space for someone else to interrupt, correct, or dismiss. The volume drops when they disagree, as if the disagreement itself requires apology. This isn't conscious performance, it's embodied memory. The body keeps a record that words can't hide. Years of making yourself small become posture, become gesture, become the way you move through rooms as if you're perpetually in the way. The nervous system holds the history, and the muscles carry out its instructions. Be smaller, be quieter, be less. And that embodied apology follows them into every space they enter, especially the places where they're supposed to have authority. In professional settings, chronic apologizing has a cost that shows up in bank accounts and missed opportunities. The workplace, where competence and confidence supposedly determine success, becomes a stage where chronic apologizers perform their own diminishment daily. Their emails begin with apologies, "Sorry to bother you," "Just following up," "Sorry if I'm being annoying," "Sorry if this is a stupid question." They qualify every request, soften every assertion, apologize for taking up the 3 minutes someone needs to read their message. And while they think they're being polite, what they're actually doing is undermining their own authority. Every sorry signals, "My needs are negotiable," My time is less valuable than yours. I don't really deserve your attention. In meetings, they apologize before speaking. Sorry, can I just add something? Sorry, this might not be relevant, but... They present ideas tentatively, as if offering them for rejection rather than consideration. And when someone interrupts them, which happens often because tentative speech invites interruption, they apologize for not finishing their thought fast enough. Meanwhile, more confident colleagues, often with worse ideas, claim the floor without apology and get credit for insight. They can't negotiate, not salaries, not raises, not better working conditions, because negotiation requires believing you deserve more, and chronic apologizers don't believe that. They accept the first offer, grateful to be wanted at all. They say yes to extra work without extra pay because saying no feels too risky, too aggressive, too much like putting themselves first. Over years, this adds up. They watch less qualified people advance while they apologize for taking up space in the room where those decisions are made. Their ideas get stolen. They propose something carefully, hedging it with maybes and what-ifs, and someone else hears it, claims it confidently a week later, and gets praised for innovation. The chronic apologizer doesn't fight for credit because fighting requires not apologizing, so they stay quiet. They tell themselves it doesn't matter. But it does matter. It matters to their career trajectory, their earning potential, their sense of professional identity. They're seen as less competent despite doing equal or better work. Because competence isn't just about quality of output, it's about how you present that output. And when you present everything as if you're sorry for producing it, people internalize that apology as admission of inadequacy. The performance review that says you need to be more assertive, more confident, show more leadership. That's code for stop apologizing for existing here. They watch less qualified people advance while they apologize for taking up space in the room where those decisions are made. The pattern doesn't just play out at work, it shapes every family system they're part of. In families, there's often one person whose unofficial job is to keep everyone else comfortable. The buffer, the translator, the one who apologizes on behalf of everyone. They didn't apply for this position. It was assigned to them, usually early, usually without words, and they've been performing it ever since. They're the ones who mediate between parents, between siblings, between generations. When mum is upset with dad, they smooth it over. When siblings fight, they negotiate peace. When extended family tensions rise at holidays, they're managing everyone's emotions like an air traffic controller trying to prevent crashes, and they apologize constantly. Sorry, dad's in a mood. Sorry she said that. Sorry everyone's stressed, as if family dysfunction is their personal failure. Holiday gatherings are particularly exhausting. They're not just attending, they're orchestrating everyone else's experience, making sure the seating arrangement won't cause conflict, checking in with each person to manage expectations, redirecting conversations when they veer toward dangerous topics, apologizing when things go wrong anyway, even though they didn't cause the argument, didn't choose the relatives, didn't create the decades of unresolved tension. But somehow, it feels like their responsibility. This often starts as a parentified child, the kid who became the emotional caretaker for adults who couldn't manage themselves. Maybe they mediated their parents' marriage. Maybe they raised younger siblings. Maybe they were just the sensitive one who could read the room and learned that reading the room meant managing it. That pattern doesn't end in childhood. It expands. It becomes their role in every family gathering, every group text, every crisis. Their siblings fall into two camps. those who take advantage, who know they can behave however they want because the chronic apologizer will smooth it over, and those who resent the martyrdom, who see the peacekeeping as performative, as a way of being morally superior. Neither understands that the chronic apologizer isn't choosing this. They're compelled by a nervous system that believes family stability depends on their constant intervention. They can't just be a family member, they have to be the emotional manager. And in trying to hold the family together, they dissolve into the background of their own family story. Whether at work or in families, the pattern runs on the same fuel: anxiety that never rests. Chronic apologizing and perfectionism are siblings. Both believe that if you just get it right enough, you'll finally be acceptable. They feed each other in a loop that has no exit, only exhaustion. The perfectionist thinks, if I'm flawless, I won't need to apologize. The chronic apologizer thinks, if I apologize enough, maybe I can become perfect. Both are chasing the same illusion. Perfectionism is an attempt to become uncriticizable. If every email is polished to perfection, if every project is executed flawlessly, if every interaction is choreographed just right, then maybe, finally, no one will find fault. And if no one finds fault, then maybe you won't have to apologize. It's preventive maintenance for the soul, except the standard for perfect keeps rising and the finish line keeps moving, but perfection is impossible, which means failure is inevitable. And when the chronic apologizer perfectionist inevitably falls short, because humans always do, the apology machine kicks into overdrive. I'm sorry I missed that typo. I'm sorry the presentation wasn't better. I'm sorry I didn't anticipate that problem. The perfectionism creates more opportunities for apology, not fewer. It's a trap disguised as a solution. They operate in all or nothing thinking. Either it's perfect or it's garbage. Either they're flawless or they're failures. There's no middle ground where good enough actually exists. So they strive for an impossible standard, fall inevitably short, and apologize for their humanity. Then they resolve to do better, to be more perfect next time, and the cycle begins again. This usually stems from the same childhood wound: love that felt conditional, affection that had to be earned through achievement, parents whose approval came with performance reviews. They learned that perfect might equal safe, that flawless might equal loved, and they've been chasing that equation ever since, even though it's never proven true. They believe perfection will save them from apologizing, but perfection just gives them more to apologize for when they inevitably fall short. This quest for flawlessness connects to another pattern they know intimately. Chronic apologizers often feel like imposters, like they've somehow tricked people into thinking they're competent, worthy, acceptable, and any moment now someone's gonna figure it out. Someone's gonna pull back the curtain and see that they're not as capable as they seemed, not as together as they appeared, not as deserving as everyone believed. They wait to be found out. Every compliment feels like evidence of successful deception, rather than genuine recognition. Every achievement gets attributed to luck, timing, other people's generosity, anything except their own skill or effort. They're convinced they've fooled everyone, and the anxiety of maintaining that illusion is constant. What happens when they realize I don't actually belong here? Apologizing becomes a preemptive strike before exposure. If they apologize first, if they point out their own inadequacy before anyone else can, maybe they control the narrative. Maybe they soften the blow of inevitable discovery. Sorry if this isn't good enough becomes a way of saying, I know I'm not good enough. Please be gentle when you confirm it. They can't internalize achievements. A successful project, a promotion, a compliment from someone they respect. None of it lands as evidence of competence. Instead, they explain it away. The project succeeded despite them, not because of them. The promotion was a mistake, or they were just the least bad option. The compliment was politeness, not truth. Their brain won't let them claim ownership of success, even when they're objectively competent, when their track record proves their capability, when everyone around them recognizes their value. They feel like they're faking it, like they're one mistake away from everyone realizing they never should have been here in the first place. It's exhausting, it's isolating, and it feeds the apologizing, because every interaction feels like another chance to be exposed. So every interaction begins with sorry. The apology becomes proof of their unworthiness. See? I knew I wasn't really good enough. I'm apologizing because deep down I know I'm a fraud. But for all their self-doubt, chronic apologizers possess something most people overlook. There's a version of empathy that doesn't heal, it consumes, and chronic apologizers know it intimately. Their empathy has no boundaries, no off switch, no way to distinguish where another person's emotions end and theirs begin. They don't just sense what others feel, they become it, they inhabit it, they carry it in their own body as if it's their responsibility to bear. This is emotional enmeshment. When someone near them is anxious, they feel that anxiety as their own. When a friend is in pain, that pain becomes theirs. When a stranger looks sad on the train, they absorb that sadness and carry it home. They're emotional sponges soaking up everything in their environment, unable to wring themselves out. It's why they apologize so much, because they feel your discomfort as intensely as you do, maybe more intensely, and they need it to stop, not just for you, but for themselves. The apology is an attempt to resolve an emotional experience that's overwhelming them. When they say sorry, what they're really saying is please feel better, because I can't hold this feeling anymore. This kind of hyper-empathy leads to vicarious trauma. They collect other people's pain like stones in their pockets, getting heavier with each interaction, each conversation, each emotional exchange. They can't watch the news without feeling devastated. They can't hear about someone's struggle without taking it on. They can't exist in a tense room without that tension flooding their nervous system. The cost is enormous. Compassion fatigue, burnout, a nervous system that never rests because it's constantly processing emotions that aren't even theirs. They mistake this for kindness, for caring, for love. But empathy without boundaries isn't kindness. It's self-abandonment disguised as care. You can't pour from an empty cup, and chronic apologizers drain themselves trying to fill everyone else's. Empathy without boundaries isn't kindness. It's self-abandonment disguised as care. And that boundaryless empathy often leads them to a particular mistake. Chronic apologizers become convinced they can read minds, and they're almost always reading criticism that isn't there. They look at a neutral face and see disapproval. They interpret silence as anger. They read distraction as evidence they said something wrong. They're constantly decoding other people's internal states, and their decoder is broken, calibrated to detect threats that don't exist. This is mind reading as cognitive distortion. They assume they know what you're thinking, and what they assume is always the worst version. You didn't text back quickly. You must be upset with them. You seemed distant in that conversation. They must have offended you. You're quiet today. They must have done something wrong. Every neutral stimulus becomes evidence of their failure. They project their worst fears onto blank screens. Someone's tired face becomes anger. Someone's preoccupation becomes rejection. someone's neutral response becomes cold dismissal, and then they apologize for offenses they invented. Sorry if I upset you, when you weren't upset. Sorry for bothering you, when you weren't bothered. Sorry for whatever I did wrong, when they did nothing wrong at all. This creates problems that don't exist. The apology itself plants the seed of doubt. Wait, were they supposed to be upset? Should they be bothered? The chronic apologizer's constant sorry makes others wonder if there's something to be sorry for. It manufactures tension where there was none, confirms fears that were baseless, and turns neutral interactions into emotional labor. When they actually check, when they ask, "Are you upset with me?" the answer is almost always no. What? No, I'm just tired. I wasn't mad, I was just thinking about work, I'm not bothered at all, why would you think that? And they feel relief, but they don't update their calibration. The next neutral face will still look like anger. Because mind reading isn't insight, it's anxiety wearing the costume of intuition. The mind reading isn't insight, it's anxiety wearing the costume of intuition. But changing these patterns requires more than just awareness, it requires actual practice. Different types of therapy unlock different doors. For chronic apologizers, some approaches work deeper than others. Therapy isn't one size fits all, and understanding which modalities target which parts of the pattern can help someone choose the path that fits their particular wound. Cognitive behavioral therapy works with the thoughts that drive apologizing. It helps identify the automatic thoughts that fire before the sorry leaves your mouth. I'm bothering them. They'll be mad if I don't apologize. I'm being too much. Then it challenges those thoughts. Is there evidence for that? What's another way to interpret this situation? Over time, CBT rewires the thinking patterns that maintain the behavior. It's practical, structured, and particularly effective for anxious apologizers who spiral in catastrophic predictions. Internal family systems approaches chronic apologizing as a part of you, not the whole you. There's a part that apologizes constantly, and EFS wants to understand what that part is protecting you from. Usually it's protecting a younger part, a wounded part that learned apologizing kept you safe. The EFS helps you dialogue with that apologizer part, thank it for trying to protect you, and help it understand that you're not in danger anymore. It's gentle, compassionate, and works beautifully for people who feel fragmented by their patterns. EMDR targets the traumatic memories that created the pattern. If your chronic apologizing stems from specific experiences, a parent's rage, a relationship's abuse, childhood moments when apologizing literally saved you, EMDR can help reprocess those memories so they don't control your present. You'll still remember what happened, but it won't carry the same emotional charge. The body releases what it's been holding, and the compulsion to apologize can soften significantly. Somatic therapy works with the body, where apologizing lives before it reaches your voice. It helps you notice the sensations that precede sorry, the tightness in your chest, the tension in your shoulders, the flutter of anxiety in your stomach. By working with those physical sensations, by learning to tolerate the discomfort without immediately apologizing to make it stop, you interrupt the pattern at its root. It's especially powerful for trauma-based apologizers whose nervous systems are still operating in survival mode. Acceptance and commitment. Therapy focuses on your values and helps you take action aligned with those values even when it's uncomfortable. If you value authenticity but you're constantly apologizing and people-pleasing, ACT helps you clarify that discrepancy and practice committed action toward who you want to be. It's less about fixing your thoughts and more about living according to what matters to you despite the discomfort. The right therapy doesn't just teach you to stop apologizing, it helps you understand why you started in the first place. But healing isn't just mental, it lives in the body. The apology lives in your body before it reaches your lips. Healing it requires going to where it's stored. Because trauma and patterns don't just live in your mind as memories and thoughts, they live in your muscles as tension, in your nervous system as hypervigilance, in your breath as shallow self-protection. Somatic healing recognizes this and works with the body directly. Somatic experiencing helps you track sensations in your body. Where do you feel the urge to apologize physically? Maybe it's tightness in your throat, pressure in your chest, a flutter in your stomach. By learning to stay with those sensations, to notice them without immediately acting on them, you create space between the impulse and the behavior. You feel the urge to apologize, but you don't have to. You can just observe the sensation, let it move through you, and watch it pass. Trauma-informed yoga offers specific practices that help. Not the Instagram version, but trauma-sensitive classes that understand how certain poses can trigger or soothe a dysregulated nervous system. Poses that open the chest after years of protective hunching. Grounding practices that help you feel safe in your body. Gentle movement that reminds you your body is yours, not something to apologize for occupying. Breathwork regulates the nervous system directly. When you're about to apologize unnecessarily, your breathing often changes, becomes shallow, rapid, held. Learning breath practices like box breathing, 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out, hold for 4 can interrupt the panic response. It signals to your nervous system that you're safe, that you don't need to deploy the apology defense. Grounding techniques bring you back to the present moment when your mind is spiraling. Feel your feet on the floor. Notice 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear. Name where you are, what year it is, that you're safe right now. These techniques interrupt the loop that says apologize now or something bad will happen. The felt sense of not apologizing is what you're working toward. How does your body feel when you set a boundary without sorry, when you state a need directly? At first it feels wrong, dangerous, exposed, but over time with practice it starts to feel like power, like groundedness, like coming home to yourself. Healing happens when your body finally believes what your mind is learning. You're safe even when you don't apologize. And that safety comes from treating yourself with something you've always withheld. Self-compassion sounds simple until you've spent a lifetime believing you don't deserve it. For chronic apologizers, being kind to yourself feels like giving yourself something you haven't earned, something reserved for people who don't constantly mess up, who don't require so much apologizing in the first place. Kristin Neff's research identifies 3 components of self-compassion, and chronic apologizers struggle with all of them. First, self-kindness instead of self-judgment. When they make a mistake, their internal voice is harsh, critical, unforgiving. Self-compassion asks them to speak to themselves the way they'd speak to a good friend. You wouldn't berate a friend for being imperfect, so why do it to yourself? Second, common humanity instead of isolation. Chronic apologizers feel alone in their struggles, like they're uniquely flawed, the only person who can't get it together. Self-compassion reminds them that suffering, imperfection, and inadequacy are part of the shared human experience. Everyone struggles, everyone makes mistakes. You're not alone in this, you're human in this. Third, mindfulness instead of over-identification. This means observing your difficult emotions without being consumed by them, without letting them define your entire reality. You can notice I'm feeling anxious about this interaction without becoming I am an anxious person who ruins everything. There's space between you and the feeling. But for chronic apologizers, self-compassion feels selfish. It feels like letting themselves off the hook. It feels like making excuses for behavior they should be apologizing for. They mistake self-compassion for self-indulgence, when actually it's the foundation of real change. You can't heal from a place of self-hatred. You can only heal from a place of self-acceptance. The research is clear. Self-compassion reduces anxiety, increases resilience, and helps people make meaningful changes in their lives, more effectively than self-criticism ever could. Because self-criticism keeps you stuck in shame, and shame doesn't motivate growth. It motivates hiding, apologizing, making yourself smaller. Self-compassion creates safety, and from safety, you can actually change. Starting small matters. One compassionate phrase when you notice yourself spiraling. This is hard and that's okay. I'm doing my best. Everyone struggles with this. It feels awkward at first, performative, fake. But over time, the neural pathways strengthen. Your brain starts to believe what you're practicing. The kind voice becomes more automatic than the critical one. Self-compassion isn't earned, it's offered, and the hardest person to offer it to is often yourself. But all the self-compassion in the world doesn't change one crucial fact. Dating when you're a chronic apologizer is like entering every interaction already losing points with yourself. Before the date even begins, you're apologizing for suggesting the restaurant, for the timing, for existing in a way that requires someone else's time and attention, and that apologetic energy shapes everything that follows. On first dates, they apologize constantly. Sorry I was 2 minutes late even though traffic exists. Sorry for ordering something complicated even though that's literally what restaurants are for. Sorry for talking too much or not enough or about the wrong things. They're so busy managing their impact that they can't actually be present. They're performing someone they think will be acceptable, rather than showing who they actually are, and who they attract reflects that energy. Chronic apologizers tend to draw one of two types. People who want someone accommodating, someone who won't challenge them, who'll adjust to their preferences, who'll make their life easier. These people might not be consciously exploitative, but they benefit from the imbalance and rarely push for equality. Or they attract people who want to rescue them, who see the apologizing as evidence of damage they can fix. Neither dynamic is healthy. Neither is based on seeing them as a whole person rather than a project or a convenience. They ignore red flags because they're already apologizing. Someone cancels last minute repeatedly. They apologize for being bothered by it. Someone doesn't reciprocate effort. They apologize for expecting too much. Someone treats them poorly. They apologize for being sensitive. The apologizing makes it almost impossible to advocate for themselves, to say this isn't working for me, to walk away from situations that aren't serving them. They over-explain and overshare, trying to preempt judgment. They tell their whole history on a first date, revealing wounds and fears and insecurities, not because they trust the person, but because they're trying to manage how they're perceived. Look, I'm broken, they're saying. Lower your expectations. Forgive me in advance. They settle for less because they don't believe they deserve more. A partner who's kind sometimes, distant others. That's more than they expected. Someone who shows interest but never commits. That's still more attention than they think they're worth. They measure potential relationships against the low bar of their self-worth and find even mediocre treatment acceptable. And often, they're attracted to people who need managing, not because they're masochistic, but because people who need managing feel familiar. They know how to navigate emotional chaos. They know how to be needed. They know how to apologize and smooth and adapt. Someone who's stable and healthy feels foreign, uncomfortable, like they don't know their role anymore. Healing changes not just how they date, but who they're willing to date. They stop choosing familiarity and start choosing reciprocity. And in relationships, that reciprocity requires ending a specific dynamic. In relationships, chronic apologizers often become two people, themselves and their partner's emotional manager. They're not just living their own life, managing their own emotions, navigating their own needs. They're also monitoring their partner's moods, anticipating their partner's reactions, managing their partner's emotional regulation, and doing the emotional labor that should be shared. They're the ones who remember everything: birthdays, anniversaries, when bills are due, when their partner's mother's birthday is, when the car needs service. Not because their partner can't remember, but because they've taken on that role. They've become the household's external hard drive, the one who holds all the information so their partner doesn't have to. They manage their partner's emotions. When their partner is upset, they're immediately in fix-it mode. What's wrong? What can I do? How can I make this better? They carry their partner's stress as if it's their own responsibility. Bad day at work? They spend the evening trying to regulate their partner's nervous system. Conflict with a friend? They become therapist, mediator, advisor. They're exhausted by the end of the day, not from their own life, but from managing someone else's. And they do this while ignoring their own needs. They can't ask for help because asking feels like burden. They can't express when they're struggling because their role is to be the stable one, the one who handles things. They've become so focused on keeping their partner comfortable that they've completely lost track of their own comfort. Do they even know what they need anymore? Or has need itself become something they've apologized away? This creates an over-functioning, under-functioning dynamic. The more they do, the less their partner does. It's not always conscious exploitation. Sometimes partners genuinely don't realize how much is being carried for them, but regardless of intention, the result is the same. One person does the emotional labor of two, while the other coasts on that labor without even recognizing it's happening. Eventually they collapse. Burnout, resentment. The realization that they've been carrying a relationship on their back and calling it partnership. But expressing that resentment requires not apologizing for having needs, and that's exactly what they can't do. They thought over-functioning was love, but love doesn't require one person to become two while the other becomes none. This dynamic becomes even more complex when both partners share the same pattern. What happens when two chronic apologizers fall in love? A strange dance where both people are trying to take up less space than the other. Where do you want to eat? I don't know. Where do you want to eat? No, really, you choose. No, you choose. They can spend 20 minutes in this loop. Two people so committed to accommodation that decision-making becomes paralysis. It can feel safe at first. Finally, someone who understands. Someone who won't be demanding, who won't require too much, who knows what it's like to carry the weight of constant self-monitoring. There's relief in being with someone who operates the same way, who speaks the same language of excessive apology and accommodation. You don't have to explain why you apologize so much. They already know. But that safety can become stagnation. Neither person pushes for what they actually want because both people are trained to defer. Neither person challenges the other to grow because both people are allergic to conflict. They can spend years in this gentle, polite dance, both people disappearing, both people accommodating, and neither person actually showing up authentically. They monitor each other's emotions constantly. Are you okay? Are you sure? You seem off. Is something wrong? Both people scanning for signs of distress. Both people ready to fix, accommodate, smooth over. It's exhausting. It's hypervigilant. And ironically, it prevents the very intimacy they're both craving because neither person can relax into just being. When conflict does arise, and it always does eventually, neither person knows how to navigate it. Conflict requires stating needs, expressing hurt, holding boundaries, and chronic apologizers don't know how to do any of that. So they apologize instead of addressing the issue. They smooth over instead of resolving. And the problem doesn't get solved, it just gets buried under layers of sorry. But there's possibility here too. Two people who understand the pattern can heal together. They can practice boundaries with each other, knowing the other person understands how hard it is. They can call each other out gently when they're apologizing unnecessarily. They can remind each other that their needs matter. They can build something based not on mutual disappearance but on mutual growth. Two chronic apologizers can heal together, but only if they stop apologizing to each other for taking up space and start holding space for both of them to be real. Romantic relationships aren't the only place this pattern shows up. Friendships carry their own dynamics. In friendships, chronic apologizers become the ones everyone calls when they're in crisis. The friend who always listens, who never judges, who shows up at 2 a.m. when someone needs support. They're the emotional support hotline for everyone they know. But when they're struggling, when they need support, who do they call? Often, no one. Because calling requires admitting you need something, and admitting you need something requires not apologizing for needing it. So they carry their struggles alone. They support everyone else through breakups, job losses, family crises, health scares. But their own pain gets minimized, managed privately, dealt with in isolation. Their friendships are often one-sided. They give and give and give, and the other person takes and takes and takes, and neither person questions whether this is actually friendship or just a convenient arrangement. The friend texts when they need something, vents for an hour, then disappears until the next crisis. The chronic apologizer doesn't push back because pushing back requires believing your time and energy have value. They're always available. Cancel your plans? No problem, they understand. Need a favor on short notice? Of course, they'd be happy to help. Want to vent again about the same issue you've vented about 17 times without taking their advice? Sure, vent away. Their boundaries are so porous that people learn they can ask for anything and receive it. But here's the test of real friendship. What happens when they finally ask for help? When they're the one in crisis? When they're the one who needs support? When they dare to be vulnerable and need something in return? Some friends show up. They're surprised maybe because it's so rare, but they show up. Those are real friendships, relationships that can handle mutuality. But other friends disappear. They're suddenly busy. They can't talk right now. They have their own stuff going on. And the chronic apologizer learns what they feared, that the friendship was always transactional, that they were valued for what they gave, not for who they were. And that hurts in a particular way. A confirmation of their deepest fear. I'm only valuable when I'm useful. Real friendship is mutual, and mutuality requires both people being willing to need and be needed. The patterns in friendship and romance often originate in the first relationships they ever had, with their parents. When chronic apologizers become parents, they face a terrifying question. Am I teaching my children to disappear the way I did? The pattern that defined their entire life now has the potential to shape their children's lives, and that weight is almost unbearable. They apologize to their children excessively. Sorry I had to say no to ice cream before dinner. Sorry I have to set a bedtime. Sorry I was at work today. Sorry for being tired. Sorry for being human. They're modeling the very pattern they're trying to heal from, showing their children that having needs, setting boundaries, being imperfect, all require apology. They struggle with boundaries as parents because boundaries feel mean. Saying no to their child's request triggers their own anxiety about being too harsh, too strict, too much. So they over-explain, they negotiate with toddlers, they apologize for rules that are developmentally appropriate and necessary. Their children either learn to manipulate this or they learn to apologize excessively themselves. Either outcome is painful. Some children of chronic apologizers become demanding, learning that one parent will always accommodate if they push hard enough. They learn to exploit the apologizing, to use guilt as currency, to expect constant accommodation. These parents watch their children become entitled and feel terrible about it, but they can't set the boundaries that would actually help because setting boundaries requires not apologizing for them. Other children absorb the pattern. They watch their parent apologize for existing and learn that's how you move through the world. They become anxious, hypervigilant, constantly checking if they're too much. They apologize before taking a cookie from their own kitchen, and the parent sees their wound reflected in their child and grieves. But here's the hope. Breaking cycles is possible. You can be an imperfect parent without apologizing for your imperfection. You can set boundaries without apologizing for having them. You can model repair. Look, I got frustrated earlier and I shouldn't have snapped at you, I'm sorry for that, without modeling excessive apologizing for things that don't warrant it. Your children don't need a perfect parent. They need a real one who shows them that mistakes happen and you take responsibility for actual harm, but you don't apologize for being human. That needs are okay. That boundaries are healthy. That taking up space isn't something to feel guilty about. The greatest gift you can give your children isn't a parent who never makes mistakes. It's a parent who knows the difference between accountability and self-erasure. But family patterns run deeper than just parent-child. The role you played among siblings often determines the role you play everywhere. Family roles are often assigned before you can speak. And some of those roles come with an apology already attached. Birth order isn't destiny, but it creates patterns, dynamics, roles that can follow you long after you've left your childhood home. Middle children know this intimately. Stuck between the responsible oldest and the baby who gets attention, they often become the invisible ones, the peacekeepers, the ones who don't cause trouble because they've learned that not causing trouble is how you survive the middle. They apologize for needing attention, for having problems, for existing in a way that requires their parents to look away from the older child's achievements or the younger child's needs. Youngest children carry their own apology. Sorry for being the baby. Sorry for getting more attention. Sorry for not being as accomplished as my older siblings who had more time to figure things out. They sometimes apologize for their youth itself, as if being born last was something they did wrong. Or they rebel against the apologizing entirely, becoming the wild child, the one who refuses to accommodate because someone else was always doing that work. Oldest children, parentified and overburdened, apologize for not being perfect role models. They were given responsibility too early, expected to set examples, made to be mini-adults before they finished being children. They apologize to younger siblings for not protecting them better. They apologize to parents for not being successful enough, responsible enough, together enough. The weight of being first becomes the weight of constant apology. Only children carry all their parents' expectations with no one to share the load. They apologize for not being enough people, for not fulfilling every dream their parents had. The pressure of being the singular focus creates its own kind of apologizing. Sorry, I can't be everything you wanted in one person. And then there are the assigned roles. The scapegoat who apologizes for family dysfunction as if they caused it. The golden child who apologizes for being favored, for the resentment their siblings feel. The lost child who apologizes for being invisible, for not demanding enough attention, for failing to fight for their place. These roles become templates. The middle child peacekeeper becomes the workplace mediator, the friend group therapist, the one who smooths over conflict everywhere they go. The responsible oldest becomes the over-functioning partner, the one who manages everything. The youngest becomes either the perpetual accommodator or the determined boundary setter who swings too far the other way. You didn't choose your position, but you can choose what you do with it. You don't have to carry a script written before you could read. Whether the pattern came from family, relationships, or work, healing it requires facing what many chronic apologizers avoid: grief. Healing chronic apologizing comes with an unexpected companion: grief. Not the kind that comes from loss alone, but the kind that comes from growth, from letting go of parts of yourself that were never serving you but felt like all you knew. There's grief for the relationships that can't survive your boundaries, the friends who disappear when you stop over-functioning, the partners who leave when you're no longer endlessly accommodating, the family members who reject you for refusing to play the peacekeeper role anymore. These losses hurt, but they're also clarifying. You learn who loved you and who loved what you did for them. You grieve not just the people, but the fantasy that they loved you for you. You grieve the years spent small, all that time apologizing, accommodating, making yourself less to make others more comfortable. The opportunities you didn't take because you didn't think you deserved them. The relationships you didn't pursue because you assumed you'd be too much. The dreams you didn't chase because chasing requires not apologizing for wanting. Those years are gone. You can't get them back. And there's real grief in that recognition. You grieve who you were, even though who you were was hurting you. There's a strange nostalgia for the version of yourself that everyone preferred, the easy one, the flexible one, the one who never caused problems. Even though that version was a prison, even though you're better off without her, you still mourn her. She kept you safe in her way. She navigated a world that felt dangerous. Letting her go feels like betrayal, even though it's liberation. There's anger too, at the time lost, at the people who took advantage, at the systems that taught you to apologize for existing in the first place, at yourself for not figuring this out sooner, even though that's not fair because you were doing the best you could with what you knew. The anger and grief tangle together, both necessary, both painful, both part of the process. The grief is bittersweet. Because yes, you're losing things, relationships that couldn't survive your growth, versions of yourself that were smaller, but you're also gaining yourself, your voice, your boundaries, your right to exist without apology. And that gain is worth the loss, but it doesn't make the loss hurt less. You grieve not because healing is wrong, but because it costs something. And what it costs is the version of you that everyone preferred, because she never asked for anything. And that grief doesn't move in a straight line. You'll think you're healed, and then something will happen, and you'll hear yourself apologize for existing again. And you'll feel like you've lost all progress, like the months or years of work just dissolved, like you're back at the beginning, like healing was an illusion you believed in temporarily. This is relapse, and it's normal. Healing isn't linear, it's a spiral. You revisit old patterns but from new heights. You slip back but not as far. You catch yourself faster. You recover quicker. That's progress even when it doesn't feel like it. Under stress, old patterns resurface because they're familiar, and familiarity feels safe when everything else feels threatening. Family visits can trigger regression because family systems activate the roles you're trying to shed. High-stakes situations at work can bring back excessive apologizing because the anxiety feels like the anxiety you knew as a child, and you knew how to handle anxiety. Apologize. New relationships can trigger relapse too. You're trying to make a good impression, trying to be wanted, trying not to mess it up, and suddenly you're apologizing for everything again. The old neural pathways light up because they're still there, just less traveled than they used to be. Stress makes us revert to what we know, even when what we know doesn't serve us. This shame spiral starts immediately. You apologized excessively, which makes you feel like you failed, so you criticize yourself for relapsing, which makes you apologize for apologizing, which confirms that you're broken, which makes you feel hopeless about ever changing. This spiral is often more damaging than the relapse itself. Self-compassion in relapse is crucial. You haven't lost progress. You're human. The pathways you're building take time to become default. Old patterns don't disappear, they just become less automatic. And every time you notice you've slipped into old behavior, that noticing is growth. That awareness is the beginning of choice. Progress isn't measured by never slipping. It's measured by how quickly you notice and how gently you return. Did you catch yourself mid-apology and stop? Did you recognize the pattern the next day instead of 6 months later? Did you treat yourself with kindness instead of criticism when you noticed? That's all progress. Relapse isn't failure, it's information. It shows you where the pattern still has roots, and every time you notice it, you're pulling one more root out. Part of not relapsing as often involves changing the very language you use. Language shapes reality. And for chronic apologizers, changing what you say changes how you exist. Words aren't just communication, they're spells you cast on your own life. Every sorry reinforces the belief that you need to apologize. Every qualifier shrinks your presence. Changing your language is changing your relationship with yourself. Start with replacing sorry with thank you. This is a simple swap that changes everything. Sorry I'm late becomes thank you for waiting. The first version centers your failure. The second version acknowledges someone's kindness. Sorry for venting becomes thank you for listening. Sorry for needing help becomes thank you for being there. The shift moves you from apologizing for being human to appreciating others for their humanity. Remove just from your vocabulary. Just wanted to check in. Just following up. Just wondering if. That word minimizes everything it touches. It says whatever I'm about to say isn't important, you can ignore it. I'm not really here. Delete it. I wanted to check in. I'm following up. I'm wondering if. The sentence becomes stronger, clearer, less apologetic without changing the actual content. Stop using qualifiers that soften your statements into questions. This might be stupid, but I could be wrong, but maybe this doesn't make sense, but these phrases are pre-apologies. They're you saying please don't judge me too harshly when you realize I have an opinion. State your ideas directly. Let them stand without cushioning. People will survive your unqualified thoughts. Notice how often you apologize versus how often you actually need to. Track it for one day. Every time you say sorry, write it down. Most people are shocked by the number. 20 times, 40 times, things that don't warrant apology. Awareness is the first step. You can't change a pattern you don't see. Direct language feels uncomfortable at first. It feels aggressive, demanding too much. That's because your calibration is off. What feels aggressive to you is actually just direct. What feels demanding is just clear. What feels like too much is just enough. The discomfort is information that you're doing something different, not evidence that you're doing something wrong. Practice in writing first. Emails are easier because you can edit. Draft your email, then go back and delete every apology that isn't necessary. Remove the sorries, the justs, the qualifiers. Read it back. Does it sound rude? Probably not. It probably sounds professional, clear, confident. Send that version. Your words create your world. Every time you speak without apology, you're telling yourself and everyone around you that your voice deserves to be heard without permission. You don't have to apologize for taking up linguistic space. Your words deserve to exist without permission too. But changing language only works if you can actually receive what you're no longer apologizing for taking. Chronic apologizers are experts at giving. But receiving? That's where they falter. Someone compliments them and they deflect. Someone offers help and they refuse. Someone expresses love and they explain why they don't deserve it. They've built their entire identity on being the giver, and receiving threatens that identity. Compliments get immediately redirected. You look nice today. Oh, this old thing. I just threw it on. You did such a great job on that presentation. Oh, it was nothing really, I could have done better. They can't let the compliment land because landing it means accepting that they have value, and accepting their value contradicts their core belief that they need to earn worthiness through constant accommodation. They can't accept help. Someone offers to carry something heavy. No, I've got it. Someone wants to contribute to a project. It's fine. I can handle it. Someone tries to support them emotionally. I'm okay. Don't worry about me. Receiving help means admitting they have needs, and admitting needs means acknowledging they're not self-sufficient, and not being self-sufficient means being a burden, and being a burden means they should apologize. So they refuse help and carry everything alone. They can't accept love without trying to earn it. Someone loves them and they immediately wonder what they need to do to keep that love. What do you need from me? How can I make your life better? What can I give you in return? They can't just sit in being loved because love without transaction feels unstable, conditional, temporary. But receiving is the other half of connection. When you refuse to receive, you deny others the opportunity to give. You prevent mutuality. You make the relationship one-directional, and one-directional relationships aren't sustainable. Eventually, the giver gets tired. Eventually, you collapse under the weight of only giving and never receiving. Receiving requires believing you're worthy of receiving, that you deserve kindness, help, love, not because you've earned it, but because you're human. This is the hardest belief shift for chronic apologizers. They've spent their lives in a transaction-based model. I give, therefore I'm valuable. Receiving asks them to believe, I exist, therefore I'm valuable. Start with compliments. When someone compliments you, practice saying just thank you. Nothing after it. No explanation, no deflection, no self-deprecation. Just thank you. Let it be awkward. Let the pause exist. Let the compliment land. Your nervous system will scream that you need to fill the space with apology or qualification. Don't. Just sit with the discomfort of being seen positively. Receiving is not taking, it's allowing. You're not demanding or extracting when you receive. You're participating in the exchange that makes relationships real. You're giving someone else the gift of being able to give to you. You're not a burden when you receive, you're a human. And one of the most powerful forms of receiving is the word no. For chronic apologizers, no is the most terrifying word in any language. It feels harsh, it feels cruel, it feels like rejection and aggression and everything they've spent their lives trying not to be. So they say yes when they mean no. They agree when they want to decline. They accommodate when they need to refuse. And every inauthentic yes builds resentment, exhaustion, and distance from themselves. No is a complete sentence. It doesn't require explanation, justification, or softening. No, I can't. No, that doesn't work for me. No, I'm not available. The period at the end is all that's needed. But chronic apologizers can't leave it there. They need to explain why, to justify the no, to make it palatable, to apologize for having the audacity to decline. The compulsion to explain weakens the boundary. No, I can't. I have this thing, but I mean, I could cancel it if you really need me, or I could come late, or maybe another time. That's not a no. That's a yes waiting to be extracted. Real no is clean. No, I'm not available. Full stop. There's a difference between I can't and I don't want to, and both are valid. I can't implies external obstacle. I'd love to, but circumstances prevent me. I don't want to is honesty. This doesn't serve me. I'm choosing something else. Chronic apologizers hide behind I can't because admitting I don't want to feels too aggressive, too selfish, too much like prioritizing themselves. But you're allowed to not want to. Wanting and not wanting are both legitimate. The guilt that follows saying no is intense. You said no, and now your nervous system is convinced something terrible will happen. They'll be mad. They'll reject you. They'll decide you're difficult and leave. The anxiety spikes, and the urge to take back the no, to apologize, to explain further, becomes almost unbearable. Sit with it. The discomfort is temporary. The boundary is necessary. Practice small no's first, declining a second, helping when you're full, saying no to plans when you're tired, refusing a request that doesn't align with your capacity. Each small no makes the bigger no's more possible. You're building a muscle that has atrophied from lack of use. Watch who react badly to your no. Those people reveal themselves. Someone who respects you will accept your boundary without trying to negotiate around it. Someone who doesn't will push, guilt, manipulate, try to extract a yes. That information is valuable. It shows you who's been benefiting from your inability to refuse. Boundaries aren't mean. They're honest. Saying no when you mean no is integrity. Saying yes when you mean no is lying. You're not protecting the relationship by lying. You're preventing a real relationship from forming. Every time you say no to something that doesn't serve you, you say yes to yourself. And that's not selfish. That's sacred. But sometimes no isn't enough. Sometimes you need to actively advocate. Self-advocacy sounds simple until you've spent your life believing your needs don't matter. Advocacy is different from boundary setting. A boundary is stopping something you don't want. Advocacy is actively pursuing something you do want. It's speaking up, asking for what you need, pushing for what serves you. For chronic apologizers, this feels impossibly aggressive. In meetings, self-advocacy looks like speaking up without apologizing first, stating your idea clearly, disagreeing when you disagree, taking credit for your work. I worked on that project and here's what I found. Not sorry, but I think. Not, I could be wrong, but just clarity, confidence, presence. In medical settings, advocacy can be life-saving, especially for women and marginalized people whose symptoms are routinely dismissed. It's saying something is wrong and insisting you be heard. That pain isn't normal. Those symptoms matter. I need you to investigate further. It's pushing back when a doctor dismisses you. I understand what you're saying, but I know my body and something is wrong. Chronic apologizers often leave medical appointments with their concerns unaddressed because they couldn't advocate for themselves against an authority figure. In relationships, advocacy means stating your needs directly. I need more quality time together. This dynamic isn't working for me. I need you to hear me when I'm upset instead of trying to immediately fix it. These statements don't require apology. They require clarity. You're not demanding anything unreasonable. You're stating what you need to stay in the relationship authentically. The distinction between advocacy and aggression is important because chronic apologizers often confuse them. Advocacy is clear, direct, honest communication about your needs. Aggression is demanding, belittling, or attacking. Saying I need you to split household labor more evenly is advocacy. Saying you never do anything around here, you're useless, is aggression. Knowing the difference helps you advocate without fearing you're being cruel. Advocacy feels uncomfortable because it centers you. It says my needs matter. It claims space and attention and resources. For someone who's spent their life making themselves invisible, this feels narcissistic, but it's not. It's a quality. Other people advocate for themselves all the time without apologizing for it. You're not doing anything wrong by joining them. Scripts can help when you're learning. I need. That doesn't work for me. I disagree because here's what I require. Practice saying these phrases out loud when you're alone. Let your mouth get used to forming words that center your needs. Then practice in low-stakes situations. Then, when it matters, the words will come more easily. Your needs are not demands. Your voice is not aggression. Your advocacy is not too much. It's exactly what you need to survive and thrive. And in our modern world, that advocacy extends into digital spaces too. Chronic apologizing doesn't stop when you go online. Sometimes it gets worse. The distance and asynchrony of digital communication amplify the anxiety that drives apologizing. You can't see someone's face, can't hear their tone, can't know if they're upset, so you apologize preemptively for everything. Text messages become minefields of unnecessary sorry. Sorry for the late reply, even though it's been an hour. Sorry for bothering you before asking a simple question. Sorry for sending another message, as if texting twice is a criminal offense. The apologizing takes up more space than the actual content of your message. Emails at work are particularly bad. Subject lines that say apologies for the delay. Opening lines that say sorry to bother you with this. Closing lines that say sorry again for taking up your time. The email becomes a string of apologies with a request buried somewhere in the middle. And while you think you're being polite, you're actually undermining your message. The reader internalizes that you think your communication is bothersome, and they start to treat it that way. Social media adds another layer. Posting an opinion but qualifying it first. Maybe I'm wrong, but sharing something you created but apologizing for self-promotion. Sorry for the shameless plug. Having a presence online but apologizing for that presence. Sorry for clogging your feed. You're apologizing for existing in digital space the same way you apologize for existing in physical space. Comment sections become places to over-explain before anyone's even criticized you. You post something and then immediately add a comment. I know this isn't perfect. I know there are issues. I know this might not be the right take. You're pre-apologizing for possible criticism, trying to control how people perceive you by getting out ahead of judgment. Digital communication removes the social cues that help you gauge reactions. You can't see if someone's smiling when they read your text. You can't hear that their terse reply is because they're busy, not because they're mad. So you fill that uncertainty with apology. You assume the worst and apologize for it just in case. But online apologizing has the same effect as in-person apologizing. It diminishes you. It signals that your presence is negotiable. It tells people that your voice requires permission, that your content is bothersome, that you're sorry for taking up bandwidth. Learning to communicate online without apology means editing yourself. Draft your message, then go back and delete the sorries. Remove the qualifiers. State what you mean directly. It will feel too harsh. Send it anyway. In most cases, no one will notice the absence of apology. They'll just notice clarity. You don't need to apologize for having an online presence. Your voice in digital spaces is as valid as anyone else's. But whether online or in person, one area where chronic apologizing causes tangible loss is financial. Chronic apologizing has a price tag, and often that price is literal. Money is already taboo in most cultures, hard to talk about, wrapped in shame and secrecy. Add chronic apologizing to that mix, and you get someone who literally cannot advocate for their financial worth. Freelancers and small business owners who are chronic apologizers undercharge dramatically. They can't state their rates without apologizing. Here's my rate, but if that's too much, we can work something out. They're negotiating against themselves before the client even responds. They lower their prices preemptively to avoid the discomfort of someone saying that's expensive, and they do this over and over, leaving thousands of dollars on the table over the course of their career. Salary negotiation becomes impossible. When offered a job, they accept the first number without question. When it's time for a raise, they can't ask for one without apologizing. I know the company's doing well, but if it's possible, and I don't want to be difficult, but could we maybe talk about a raise? That's not negotiation. That's hoping someone will give you something without you having to actually ask for it. They can't split bills fairly. When eating out with friends, they always offer to cover more than their share. When someone owes them money, they don't follow up. It's fine, don't worry about it. They lend money they can't afford to lose and never ask for it back, because asking would mean admitting someone owes them something, and admitting that would mean acknowledging their money matters. The economic impact compounds over a lifetime. The raise you didn't ask for means every subsequent raise is based on a lower starting point. The projects you undercharge for mean you're earning less per hour than your work is worth. The bills you overpay mean your savings grow slower. Over years, decades, this can mean tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost income. The apologizing is costing you your financial security. And it's not just about earning, it's about spending too. They can't return items that are defective or wrong, because returning requires implying someone made a mistake, and implying someone made a mistake feels mean. They get charged for things they didn't order, and they pay anyway. They accept bad service without complaint because complaining would mean expecting better, and expecting better would mean believing they deserve it. Money is one of the most practical ways chronic apologizing harms you. This isn't abstract or emotional. This is your retirement account, your ability to travel, your financial cushion when emergencies happen. Your worth has a number attached to it, and chronic apologizing keeps that number artificially low. You're not too expensive. You're not greedy for asking for fair compensation. You're not demanding for expecting people to pay what they owe. Your work has value. Your time has value. And that value doesn't require an apology. Money isn't dirty, and asking for what you're worth isn't greedy. It's recognizing that your time, energy, and expertise have value, and that value doesn't require an apology. Beyond the practical and financial, there's a dimension many don't consider. For some chronic apologizers, the healing isn't just psychological, It's spiritual. The question of worth, of whether you're allowed to exist without apology, connects to deeper questions of meaning, purpose, and belonging in the universe. And for some people, religious or spiritual frameworks either deepen the wound or provide the path to healing. Many chronic apologizers grew up in religious environments that taught inherent unworthiness. Original sin. You're born broken and must spend your life atoning. You're inherently flawed and only divine grace, earned through submission and perfection, can redeem you. These theologies create chronic apologizers. If your religion teaches you that your basic nature is sinful, you'll spend your life apologizing for that nature. But other spiritual traditions teach something different. Buddhism speaks of Buddha nature, the inherent goodness and worthiness in every being. Christianity, when not twisted by shame, speaks of being beloved, chosen, created with intention and love. Secular spirituality offers inherent human dignity. The idea that consciousness itself, the fact of your existence, grants you worth. Some chronic apologizers pray like they're apologizing. Sorry for asking, sorry for needing, sorry for existing in a way that requires your attention, God. They approach the divine the same way they approach everyone else, as if their presence is burden even to an infinite being. But spiritual practices done well can teach them something different. Meditation can help them sit with discomfort without immediately apologizing to make it stop. Prayer can become conversation rather than constant penance. Contemplative practice can reveal that silence is okay, that you don't need to fill every space with apology or explanation. That just being, without producing or accommodating, is enough. The difference between healthy guilt and toxic shame becomes crucial here. Guilt says I did something wrong. Shame says I am something wrong. Healthy guilt, including religious guilt when it's functioning correctly, is a moral compass. It tells you when you've caused harm so you can repair it. Toxic shame says you're fundamentally flawed just for existing. Healthy spirituality cultivates the first and heals the second. Some chronic apologizers need to leave their religious communities to heal because those communities are built on shame and they can't heal in the environment that wounded them. Others find spiritual homes that affirm rather than diminish, that preach worthiness rather than unworthiness, that offer belonging without requiring self-erasure. Whatever your spiritual framework, this truth remains. You are not a mistake. You don't need to apologize to God, or the universe, or existence itself for being created. But you don't have to heal alone. Sometimes the most powerful healing happens in community. There's something that happens when chronic apologizers find each other, a collective exhale. Finally, people who understand. You don't have to explain why you apologize constantly. You don't have to justify your anxiety. You don't have to defend your patterns. Everyone in the room knows, and that shared knowing creates safety for healing. That individual work sometimes can't. The isolation of chronic apologizing is profound. You feel like you're the only person who can't get it together, who can't stop saying sorry, who feels like a burden just for existing. Everyone else seems fine. Everyone else seems to navigate life without constant apology. What's wrong with you? This isolation keeps the pattern locked in place because you can't heal what you think makes you uniquely broken. Finding community changes that. Therapy groups, support groups for people pleasers, online forums for chronic apologizers, 12-step programs for codependency. These spaces show you that you're not alone, not unique in your struggle, not defective in a way that singles you out. The pattern is common, the wounds are similar, and other people have healed, which means you can too. There's power in the Me Too moment. Someone shares their experience and you recognize yourself in it. They talk about apologizing for asking questions at work, and you've done that. They describe the anxiety before saying no, and you feel that. They admit they can't receive compliments and you can't either. Every similarity is permission to be human, evidence that you're not fundamentally flawed, just struggling with something many people struggle with. Witnessing others set boundaries makes it easier to set your own. You watch someone in group therapy say no clearly and survive. You see someone in a forum post describe advocating for themselves and being respected for it, not rejected. You hear someone talk about the grief of healing and realize your grief is normal. Their growth becomes evidence that your growth is possible. Group healing provides accountability too. You tell people in your support group that you're going to practice saying no this week. They ask you about it next week. Did you do it? How did it feel? The accountability helps you actually practice instead of just thinking about practicing. But not all communities are helpful. Some groups become echo chambers where everyone enables each other's apologizing. Everyone's too nice to give feedback. Everyone accommodates everyone else's avoidance. You need communities that challenge you gently, that push you toward growth while understanding the difficulty, that witness your struggle without fixing it for you. Real community is mutual. It's not just you receiving support, it's you giving it too. And sometimes the most healing thing is helping someone else see their worth when they can't see it themselves. You can advocate for them even when you can't advocate for yourself. And in doing that, you start to believe it's possible. You're not alone. Healing in community doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're wise enough to know that some battles are won together. And when you find that community, when healing takes root, you start to experience something unfamiliar. The first time you experience true reciprocity, you might not recognize it. It feels too easy, too balanced, too good. You're waiting for the catch, the expectation, the moment when you'll need to start over-functioning to maintain this relationship. But that moment doesn't come, because this is what healthy relationships actually look like. Reciprocity means both people give and receive. One person's needs don't always override the other's. Decision-making is shared. Emotional labor is distributed. Care flows both directions. Not in strict 50-50 measurement. Relationships aren't transactional, but in a balance that feels equitable over time. Sometimes you give more, sometimes they give more, but neither person is always the giver or always the taker. The unfamiliar comfort of not managing someone else's emotions is disorienting. Your partner is upset and you don't immediately go into fix-it mode. You can just be present with them while they feel their feelings. You don't have to make it better. You don't have to apologize for whatever you're sure you did wrong. You can just listen, hold space, trust that they can handle their own emotions. Your friend remembers something you mentioned in passing and brings it up later. They noticed you were stressed about a thing and they checked in without you having to ask. They showed up. They initiated. They did the emotional labor of caring without you having to manage their caring. And it's so different from relationships where you're the only one remembering, noticing, checking in. Colleagues share credit instead of taking it. Partners notice when you're tired without you having to announce it. Friends reciprocate effort, planning things, suggesting times to meet, doing the work of maintaining the friendship. And you realize how much you've been carrying alone for how long. This is what's possible. This is how people can treat each other. You're suspicious at first. What's wrong? What's the catch? When does the other shoe drop? You might even test it, pulling back slightly to see if they'll disappear now that you're not over-functioning. Some people do. But the ones who stick around, who continue showing up, who keep offering reciprocity even when you're not performing perfect accommodation, those are your people. Learning to trust reciprocity instead of waiting for it to end is its own healing. You can relax into being cared for. You can let someone else do the emotional labor sometimes. You can receive without guilt. The relationship doesn't require your constant management to survive. It survives because both people want it to, because both people are tending it, because it's mutual. Reciprocity isn't special treatment, it's baseline. But when you've never had it, it feels like a miracle, and it shows you what you are missing, yourself. The version of you that gets to be cared for, not just the version that cares, the version that receives, not just gives, the whole you. This is what you deserved all along. But reciprocity and healing aren't destinations, they're practices. Healing chronic apologizing isn't something you complete, it's something you practice. There's no finish line where you're perfectly healed, never apologizing inappropriately again, permanently transformed into a boundaried, self-advocating person who never slips. That's not how healing works. Healing is ongoing, a practice you commit to, a relationship with yourself that requires maintenance and attention and compassion. You'll have new triggers as life changes, a new job, a new relationship, parenthood, caregiving, grief. Any major transition can bring old patterns back. You thought you were past this, and suddenly you're apologizing constantly again, and it's confusing and frustrating. But the patterns aren't gone, they're just dormant. Stress reactivates them. That doesn't mean you failed, it means you're human. Maintenance strategies help. Regular check-ins with yourself. How am I doing? Am I apologizing more than usual? Am I setting boundaries or accommodating to keep peace? Am I giving myself compassion or falling into self-criticism? These check-ins catch patterns early before they're fully entrenched again. Therapy tune-ups when you need them. You don't have to be in crisis to see a therapist. You can go back when you notice patterns resurfacing, when you need support through a transition, when you want to process something before it becomes overwhelming. Maintenance therapy prevents backsliding. Keep practicing boundaries even when they feel easy. The muscle atrophies without use. Say no when you mean no. State needs clearly. Advocate for yourself even in low-stakes situations. The practice keeps the skill sharp, so when high-stakes situations arise, you can access it. You know you're healing when old triggers feel different. Something that used to send you into immediate apology mode now just makes you pause. You notice the urge but don't act on it automatically. That pause is progress. That awareness is growth. You're creating space between stimulus and response, and in that space is choice. You know you're healing when you can apologize appropriately and mean it. You caused actual harm and you say, "I'm sorry, I was wrong, I'll do better," without it spiraling into, "I'm a terrible person who should apologize for existing." You can take responsibility without making it about your fundamental unworthiness. That's maturity. You know you're healing when other people's reactions don't destroy you. Someone's disappointed in you, and you can acknowledge that without believing you're a disappointment. Someone's angry, and you can let them have their anger without absorbing it as evidence of your badness. You have boundaries around other people's emotions that protect you while still letting you care. You don't need to be perfectly healed. You just need to keep practicing, and every practice, no matter how small, is an act of choosing yourself. And that ongoing practice leads somewhere beautiful. Living unapologetically doesn't mean never saying sorry. It means knowing the difference. It means choosing. You apologize when you've caused actual harm. You stand firm when you've just existed in a way someone else found inconvenient. You know the difference now. That knowledge changes everything. What does healed life look like? Not perfect, not without struggle, not immune to stress or difficulty, but different, grounded in a way that used to feel impossible. There's a quiet confidence that wasn't there before. Not arrogance, not certainty, just a solid sense of, I belong here, my presence matters, I don't need to apologize for existing. Your relationships are based on mutuality. You're not managing everyone's emotions anymore. You're not the designated peacekeeper. You're just a person in a relationship with other people, and everyone carries their own weight. Some relationships ended when you stopped over-functioning, and that hurt. But the ones that remained are real. They chose you, not what you did for them. Your career benefits from self-advocacy. You negotiate for yourself. You claim credit for your work. You speak up in meetings without apologizing first. Your confidence, even when it feels fake at first, changes how people perceive you. They take you seriously because you take yourself seriously. Opportunities open that were always available but you couldn't access because you were apologizing your way out of them. Your internal voice is kinder. The self-criticism hasn't vanished entirely. Probably never will, but it's not the dominant voice anymore. When you mess up, you can acknowledge it without spiraling. When you succeed, you can claim it without explaining it away. The voice in your head sounds more like a supportive friend and less like a harsh critic. You still feel deeply. Your sensitivity didn't disappear with the apologizing. You still notice micro-expressions, still sense energy shifts, still pick up on emotional undercurrents. But now you have boundaries around that sensitivity. You can feel without absorbing. You can witness without taking responsibility. Your empathy serves you instead of consuming you. You have energy for your own life. All that energy that went into managing everyone else's emotions, monitoring everyone's moods, preemptively apologizing to prevent imagined catastrophes, it's yours now. You can use it for things you care about: hobbies, creativity, rest, actual living, instead of constant maintenance. The internal shift is subtle, but seismic. From I'm too much to I'm enough. From I need to earn my place to I belong because I exist. From I should apologize for my needs to my needs are valid and expressing them is healthy. These aren't affirmations you repeat, though maybe they started that way. They're truths you've internalized. Your nervous system believes them now. You're not fixed. You're not perfect. You're not never struggling again. You're just free. Free to exist without apology. Free to take up space. Free to have needs and express them. Free to set boundaries and enforce them. Free to be imperfect and human and still worthy. The peace you feel isn't from having all the answers. It's from being okay with questions, from not needing to understand everything, control everything, apologize for everything, from presence rather than performance, from being yourself rather than being who you think others need you to be. You're not too much, you never were, and the people who love the real you, the unapologetic you, those are your people, the ones who see you whole and stay, who want your boundaries because they want you real, who don't need you to manage them, who can handle your no and still respect your yes, who see your sensitivity as gift, not burden. That's the life waiting on the other side of sorry.